Supervisor.
To see you. I see Danny Bonnet.
Hi, I'm Danny Bonsich. I'm the Mechanical and Plumbing Plan Review Engineer.
Thank you, Danny. I think I got all the city staff. It's a big list. Oh no, I see actually Joshua, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Josh Armstrong. Sorry, my video isn't working. Can't figure it out. I work with Danny and Chuck, and I'm relatively new to the department, so just kind of using this as a learning process and seeing if there's any input I can have from being in the industry recently.
Thank you so much for being here. Okay, let's go through our stakeholders. I'll go down the list. I see in the participants, I see Darren Ramirez first. I think you're on mute.
Muted. There we go. I'm Darren Ramirez with RJA. I'm a mechanical engineer and principal here as well.
Thank you for being here, Darren. Eric Johnson.
Hi, I'm Eric. I work up in Boulder on the construction side of affordable housing projects, including several all-electric projects.
Thanks. Mark Jelinski.
Hi, Mark Jelinski. I'm a Chief Mechanical Engineer at RMH Group, consulting mechanical electrical plumbing firm.
Thanks, Mark. Mark Snyder.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Snyder with 4240 Architecture. I'm an associate principal and architect here.
Great. Matt Jones.
Hello, Matt Jones, Vice President, Milliner White, General Contractor. I'm going to refrain from using my video. I'm hotspotting from my truck, so bear with me.
Sounds good. Thank you for being here. Mike Fulton.
Mike Fulton, Western Mechanical Solutions. We've proposed a few amendments to the code.
Thanks, Mike. Mike Reynolds.
Hello, Mike Reynolds, Nava Real Estate, and I apologize. I'm on a different virtual meeting as well.
Thank you for being here at least part of the time. Let's see, Teresa.
Teresa Gray Ramirez Johnson, Associate I'm an electrical engineer.
Thank you, Teresa. Taylor.
Taylor Roberts, Site Group 14 Engineering, Energy Efficiency Consultant.
Great, thank you. I think we had one more CPD staff person join, Antonio.
How's it going? Antonio Navarro, Senior Inspector, City of Denver.
Thanks for being here. Sean, do you want to say hi? Sean is our consultant helping draft these proposals.
Hello, everyone. Sean Dennison, New Buildings Institute, and I'm going to stay on mute for a while. I've got a garbage truck outside.
Sounds good. Okay. And did I miss anyone? This is a big group, which is great. I'm glad there's so much interest in this subject. It does make it somewhat more challenging for me to catch everyone and to make sure we're hearing from everyone. So I will endeavor to do my best as just the facilitator here. All right, I got everyone. Fantastic. Or else somebody's quiet, but I think I got everyone. Okay, so today we're going to discuss, remember, there's two code proposals that this working group is going to work on, one around electrification of space heat, the other around electrification of water heat. Very briefly, because I know we have a couple people who weren't in the last meeting, the goal of this group is to refine those proposals and bring them back to the code committee. We've really been challenged by city council and by our own goals to make sure that new buildings are leading the way, and Energize Denver has requirements around electrification for existing buildings for some of the easier to electrify system types starting in 2025, which will overlap with this code in terms of when buildings are coming out of the ground, becoming operational. And so let's start today by diving in further on space heat. We tried to, in the first meeting, identify the problems that we're seeing or challenges with the proposals as they were currently drafted. And so I think what we sent back to you was a draft from Sean that and the city that looks I think, Sean, you'll see notes in the draft that everyone got in your email on how we think we've addressed a lot of the different things we heard in the first meeting. So we want to bring back a robust draft for further input. And we're hoping that today's meeting, because we only have 4 meetings, can come pretty close to refining this draft down to what you think really is both on track for Denver's climate goals, helping new buildings lead the way when we know Energized Denver is in place for existing buildings and is truly doable and achievable for all the buildings in Denver. So with that, I'll pass it to you, Sean, to just walk through kind of what is the current kind of refined version based off of what we heard last time. And then I'll pull up a version of the document with some comments from Elizabeth Gilmore, who wasn't able to be here today, so that we can discuss some of those as a group and write in some responses to the group's thoughts on some of those, but also add other comments and other discussion and hopefully get to a place where we're pretty happy with this draft today. Any amendments folks want to make to our plan for the next 51 minutes? Okay, sounds good. Go ahead, take it away, Sean. As long as the garbage truck's gone.
It's down the street, so hopefully my noise cancellation is good enough. All right. So this is the draft that you should have received, and this is something much simpler and more direct than the original proposals that went through that were based on what Sweep had proposed for the code. And this really focuses, as Katrina said, on bringing the requirements that have already been adopted to come into effect in the future through Energized Denver and new buildings. The thought being that new buildings should stay ahead of our existing buildings, but also that any equipment that's subject to the Energized Denver ordinance that gets installed now is basically only going to have one life cycle to it before it will have to be electrified. So we also want to set up buildings for success. So we have focused for that first round, the regulations that go into effect in 2025, which prohibits warm air furnaces, and it does allow electric resistance heating, but then you have to do a renewable energy offset. So to take that kind of half step beyond what's in there and to simplify things, this prohibits the use of warm air furnaces and prohibits electric resistance except for in specific cases. And those cases are the 3 exceptions that we see here. One is makeup air systems serving healthcare facilities. And this is to address an issue that Mark brought up, that healthcare facilities need to be fully backed up so that they can continue to operate in a power outage. And so if a heat pump makeup air system would have to be back up, that's considerably larger for their backup system. So being able to use gas on that allows them to manage backup energy systems. So that's why it's makeup air systems for healthcare facilities only, for that really specific emergency related case. The second one is electric resistance heat used for supplementary heat in accordance with Section C 403.4.1111. This is something that we've discussed before. This is something that's already in code, that it allows electric resistance to back up heat pumps. One thing I think we would want to discuss today, electric resistance that is integrated into unitary heat pump equipment. This is not an uncommon situation. Basically automatically complies with this because that's how it's configured to work. But do we need to be explicit about that? That if electric resistance that's integrated into the systems, do we just need to say it's exempt, or can we keep it the way that it is? And then the last one is up to 1.35 watts per square foot of conditioned floor area of electric resistance space heating. 1.35 watts per square foot is the heating load threshold for passive house. This gives us a convenient place to just kind of key in that if you have a super insulated building that only needs a little bit of heating, then it's reasonable to use electric resistance. These are small, modest loads, and also sometimes those loads are so small it can be difficult to find heat pump equipment that's small enough to meet it in some cases. So this allows for these really well insulated buildings to use electric resistance. And then it also just allows a certain amount of electric resistance to be used in a building for spot heating, for boost heating, because it's on a whole building basis and not just the heated area. You could also use this for, the heating of your stairwells or some of these heat-only spaces that are only maybe have freeze protection or don't quite qualify as conditioned space. You're just providing a little bit of conditioning. And then the supplementary heat control section, the only modification we've made there is to specify that it can't operate when the air temperature, unless the air temperature is below 20 degrees Fahrenheit. This ensures that the electric resistance that's being used as supplementary heat isn't going on a lot, because in that case, if that's a lot of electric resistance load for, particularly in multifamily, for occupants to absorb. So we want the heat pump to really go down to 20 degrees. There are lots of models that operate efficiently, more efficiently than electric resistance down to that temperature. So that's one thing that we've added to the supplementary heat. So we welcome comments, questions, anything that would make this better.
Thank you, Sean. And I think we would welcome general comments from this group to start. And then I do want to go through some of the specific questions that Elizabeth raised, but since she's not here, let's go to the group for specific comments and questions first. And then we'll go through some of those. It's great because it's a big group to raise your hand. So thank you to those who did that. I would ask the question because I know some of you are very technical mechanical engineering experts. Some of you are more on the architecture, design, builder side of things. And so for those who might not feel like if these are exactly the right technical list of things, I would also really like to hear from folks in the group around how do you think this will play out on your projects? Does this seem doable for the kinds of things you're building in Denver, and some sort of a higher level commentary is also welcome, not just technical in the weeds commentary. So with that, Taylor, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I have kind of high level comment and then a few little ones, but I think from a high level, and I think this was maybe brought up last time, I apologize, I wasn't at the last meeting, but just this is a mandatory section. So, right, that's important to note. So if you're doing modeling pathway, you still have to do all of this. And where I struggle with that is, and I know is brought up at some point, but VAVs with electric reheat or a lot of systems, right? If the system is electrified and it's meeting the Denver's energy goals, why does it still have to meet this? And that's my big question. So, VAV with reheat is a very common system. You could do an electric heat pump and energy recovery at the VAV system, and that takes care of the majority of the heating load. But this is saying then you can't do electric reheat at the VAV boxes, but you could do a gas boiler and do reheat with hot water with gas, which seems a little crazy to me. And again, just with how common of a system it is, I feel like to completely make it mandatory, you cannot do it, seems a little aggressive. I think in general, just saying make your heating electric isn't that big of a deal, but specifying how people do it, I think there'll be pushback, right? Because again, if prescriptively, I think it totally makes sense, but if you can meet the goals and be electric, why do you have to tell the project how to do it? And then just my last comment, which maybe isn't a big deal, but the 20-degree heat pump, that's totally fine for everything but PTAX and VTAX. There's really only one manufacturer of a VTAC and one manufacturer of a PTAC that we've found that can meet that. Most are around the 40 to 32 degrees of heat pump operation. So that would also, again, I don't know if that's that big of a deal because we should probably be getting away from those anyways, but that's really going to severely limit the manufacturers available with that.
Sean, I think we had tried to address both of those things. Do you want to speak to that? Because I think some of this is just clarification of what is intended here.
Mm-hmm. So I think one of the important things is, so it depends in part on the type of PTAC. The package terminal heat pumps, there are only a couple that, and I think you're right, I think it is only one that goes down to the 20. But for package terminal air conditioners, most of those either use a separate system for heating entirely, or they use a hydronic, coil, or they use electric resistance as the heating source. And so this one for PTACs would really only apply to the ones that use electric resistance for their heating. The package terminal heat pumps that could, being able to use those as an alternative, I think you're right that it does raise issues, but I know that in some of the economic analysis, as I understand that Denver has done, letting the electric resistance kick in at above 20 really begins to impact affordability. And since package terminal units are used primarily in housing and hotels, that then becomes an issue of having that expense. So we have been, I think, thinking about how to address PTACs because they are so widely used, but they are such, there's both efficiency and electrification issues with them. I think that is one place that we would really appreciate some additional feedback. I do have a question for you about the VAV with heat. So in the systems that you see, are they including more electric resistance than this 1.35 watts per square foot of conditioned area? I think there's a couple of different ways to do heat on VAV. You could do it as heat and you can do it as reheat. And I think there is a certain amount of losing reheat systems, where you're cooling the air and then warming it back up. Maybe that's not such a big loss.
I would just jump in and say there that it almost always would be above that 1.3, even when doing a parallel fan powered system or something similar.
Yeah, but there are two places of heat, and I think that's important, right? The heat at the VAV RTU or unit, right, which is heating the outside air, which is the majority of the heating load, which I totally think, that makes sense to be a heat pump or even and have energy recovery in a lot of cases. And then there's, that reheat at the VAV box. So those are two separate heating, I guess, portions, Sean.
Mm-hmm.
But another issue we see, right, like just an example would be a project we're working on that's looking to be net zero. It's not in Denver, but it's in the Front Range. And they have and they're doing a VRF system, which meets all these requirements. But they have certain spaces that they have such a big occupant load that they have to do an airside system, right? They really need that immediate response that an airside system gives them. So for those certain areas, they're doing like a VAV with a heat pump with electric reheat. What I don't really understand, and my, I guess, first review of this too is that wouldn't be allowed either, which I think that's kind of a step below. And then the step above is just that it's a really common system. So if you're using a heat pump for the outside air and still not being able to do it for the reheat, I just think it's a big push.
In that targeted system, I think it would depend entirely on how much of the building, since the allowance right now is based on the whole building. As long as that area was, I guess, small enough, you would still be able to do it limited. So,
Sean, can you explain that again, just how the allowance is based on the entire building square footage? I'm not sure I followed that.
Yeah, so the allowance is an amount of resistance heat that is allowed on the entire conditioned floor area of the building. So that means that it could be a very large load for a small place, or a very light load spread out over the building. So you could concentrate it all in one place, and it really is meant to just give a certain amount of flexibility. One, that we can have these low energy buildings where they can satisfy all their heating, and then the other is just that sometimes you have exactly these peaking loads in buildings that are asymmetrical, unusual, and sometimes the responsiveness of something like electric resistance is needed. And so we wanted to provide some flexibility for that as well.
Can I ask, Taylor, does that get at, and I want to move to the next question, but does that get at your concern that you voiced? Because I think that the intent was to allow some, as Sean was saying, electric resistance for, as, you know, sort of as designed, whatever someone needed to use it for, but without locking in too many higher energy bills. And the same with too much electric resistance. And the same with P-tax. I think the intent was that P-tax would still just go forward as they do today. This is because they're usually paired with boilers, not furnaces. And this is a proposal to stop furnaces. But yeah, does this actually address the questions? Or do you have something you would propose to address the questions with that clarification, Taylor?
Yeah, well, I guess the first thing would be, I would still assume that the city would rather see VAV with electric reheat than VAV with the gas boiler reheat. Maybe not, but that's my assumption. So I think my proposal would be that you just add supplementary heat or reheat can be electric. And that would handle that. But I think the 1.35 is so low that really only helps in the areas of where it's a specific one part of the building. And it's even just like, I'm even just thinking like major renovations, all these things, right? If they have a VAV with electric reheat in there, they can't reuse that. They can't just put, you know, a heat pump at the RTU. So if they're, you know, changing use type and that type of thing. So I think it really brings up a lot of issues where, again, I would rather see you be stronger on saying no gas, but just provide more flexibility on how you do that. And then, yeah, the heat pump thing, I guess, yeah, it's just a really packaged terminal heat pumps, and VTAX with heat pump operation is those two ones. But I think that's less of a big deal, honestly, than the reheat.
Keep in mind that this is only new buildings, so it's not all new equipment. That one will be impacted by Energize Denver, but this is just new buildings.
But a change of use, right, would fall under this?
Yeah. No, because that wouldn't be a new building. And so instead of it being phrased the way that normal code language is phrased as just a requirement that applies to new construction, if you can see here, it specifically says in new buildings.
Oh, I should have caught that, Sean. This is supposed to be new buildings, major renovations. Energize Denver only covers equipment replacement, so this needs to cover all major renovations also.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. You know, when that Chapter 5 section says full compliance with the code, I would read that to assume that this gets required in the major renovation, just like Taylor said, when it's a change of use.
It wouldn't the way that it's written now, because full compliance with the code is full compliance with,
sure,
you know, it's still saying, you know, this is specifically calling out a new building. So, you know, it would comply because it's not a new building. But if we need to change that for a policy alignment, then that's another matter.
Yes, we do. Sorry, I hadn't caught that. Okay, let's go to Darren. Sean, I don't know, can you make the change that Taylor was suggesting while Darren is I think it's going to be helpful if we can make some of these live in real time.
That one I'm not sure how to make, so maybe we should get farther along in the discussion and then we can discuss a way to implement it.
Okay. Let's go to Darren and then Taylor, we'll circle back. Maybe you can even work on like what might be a specific recommendation to do what you were saying. Sounds good. Darren.
Sure. I guess my couple of concerns reading it are kind of what's been said before. It goes back to, you know, if the goal is no gas, maybe the language can just be simplified. Why are we talking specifically about warm air furnaces, you know? And but at the same time, I'm really concerned about the makeup air systems in general on small commercial projects around Denver. I mean, it's going to be very difficult to totally electrify small makeup air type units, even with heat pumps. It just would come at a pretty substantial operations cost for tons of little restaurants and things like that. So while it's not impossible, I just want to make sure it is something that we want to push that hard. And then similarly, I've kind of got some little engineering type concerns about that 1.35 type thing. I think that's very difficult to achieve, even if you're just doing heating and stairwells and stuff. But I guess the way that you were explaining that, Sean, was that would be over the entire building square footage. So that actually helps a bunch. So I guess that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Darren. I think the reason we had leaned towards just warmer furnaces is because that's what Energized Denver covers. And
right.
The larger buildings that tend to have, the taller buildings in particular, that tend to have boilers and hydronic systems are just somewhat harder to electrify, even if new buildings, right, tend to be the ones that have the PTAX with a boiler. And so that, because that starts later for existing buildings.
Mm-hmm.
These are what's very plug and play for the design community, are the furnaces. Are you saying that you're sort of, what would you propose though as an alternative?
Yeah, I think it warrants some discussion on whether makeup air systems in general or under a certain size, maybe less than by industry sector, is kind of a way to think about it. Just thinking about the small kind of light commercial projects where we are using small makeup air units. The price point of going to a heat pump system, not alone the operating costs. When you're down into the teens and your makeup air unit still running full blast, I mean, with electric demand charges, you could be paying thousands of dollars to turn that makeup air unit for 15 minutes, right? And so I just want to make sure that's feasible for business owners too.
So you might propose making the makeup air systems an exception in all cases?
Perhaps, and I wonder too if there's a size limitation, where that does or doesn't make sense too.
All small systems, small makeup air systems or something? Okay.
I do think you have to be specific on that language, because then it could be like a multifamily where they're providing air, like ventilation air. I don't know if that's what you want to exclude or not, but then that would be excluded. So.
Yeah.
One thing that had been considered before is only exempting makeup air systems for applications where the mechanical code prohibits energy recovery ventilation, because ERV is another way to deal with makeup.
That's kind of one of the things I was thinking about too. And I mean, I don't want to muddy this too much with the energy recovery section, but it does seem to make a lot of sense.
And I don't remember off the top of my head if, I think, are restaurants one of those exempted end uses?
Yeah, you cannot recover that.
Yeah, because there's just too many contaminants.
Right.
There are.
Would that adequately cover the concern that you're seeing?
Is there a way to exclude some of those uses under Part 3 of the code as far as uses and putting that in there? Just thinking outside the box.
Yeah, do you want to work on looking at that? Because I do think even if it's very rough, we don't have to get final language, but I think it's going to help folks, Sean, if you're able to sort of just put some options in to just play at least like placeholders on concepts that we're going to refine as a group. Are we getting to somewhere where you might be able to do that? Okay, I think he's doing it. Eric, let's turn to you to hear some more comments, and we'll circle back around on this.
I was just going to say, thinking of a multifamily project in Boulder that was all electric, originally I was going to say we wouldn't fit under this requirement because we did have some electric resistance heat. It was devoted to the bathrooms, and there's no interconnection between that little bit of baseboard heat and the multi-zone heat pumps. In other words, the electric resistance is not on board. However, as the discussion went on, it seems possible that we would actually fit under exception number 3 if we are allowed 1.35 watts over the entire floor area of the unit. That might buy us 2-3 feet of electric resistance heat, which is all it takes for a bathroom.
Great. Anything else that you want to share just in terms of how this might actually kind of play out in projects?
That's all for now. I'll chime in if I have something else. Thanks.
Thank you. Mike Fulton?
Yeah, I just want to say, it seems like you're kind of picking winners and losers to jump on what Taylor's saying. You know, you're saying you have to do a system this way instead of just saying our goal is to get rid of electric and then have, you know, I forget if Denver's has EUI targets long-term, but if they do, it seems like that gets all covered within this proposal. So, and then the second thing is the exceptions at 1.35, I think is super onerous and needs to be updated. We did a quick look at a couple projects that we were working on. An engineer had done the set of plans and now this was exterior skin, not interior. So I recognize that, you know, it's over the whole building, not just at the skin, but it was 16 watts a square foot. So, you know, you're talking an order of magnitude off. So, so that's my quick take.
Thank you. Can I ask so I think I heard both from you and Taylor sort of push to say you should just tell us to do all electric and let us figure it out. But we had heard sort of the opposite from the group last time because there was a push that, you know, in some cases, there's not good plug and play alternative. You're requiring very different designs because the plug and play alternative for like a PTAC is a PTHP and there aren't very many of those available and they have a cutoff under at least with cutoff under 40 degrees. Like, tell me a little bit more, like we're trying to strike that balance. So where does that balance lie? If it's not, we heard last time, it's not all, we heard this time, maybe this is sort of too specific.
Well, I think, you know, so my understanding is Denver's doing EUI targets, right? Based on the buildings. So if that's the case, why not give the designer the opportunity to come up with a creative solution themselves instead of, you know, saying you have to do this, this, or this. That's my, I mean, there's going to be new products. There's new products every time we go to ASHRAE and look at new stuff coming out. There's going to be new products that if you get too specific on how to do it, that are going to not be approved to be able to do it with this kind of terminology, in my opinion.
How do we make it a little more general? Because mostly this is just saying you can't do warm air furnaces and you can't just do all electric resistance because that, one, for the climate reason, electric resistance because it runs up bills. How do we make, and then there's some specifics to that. Do you have a proposal for how you would make that a little bit more general? Because it doesn't sound like I'm hearing you say that you actually think it should just say all electric.
I don't. I'd have to think about it a little bit.
That's okay. Thank you still for the comment.
That
Mark,
actually does-
Darren, did you want to, sorry, you were listening.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I wonder if it's as easy there as having an exception that, just like Taylor said, that says, or if it's all electric and it meets the performance criteria, it's okay. You know, you can keep all the individual ones there to make it a prescriptive path, but also keep the performance path open might be a way to look at it.
I like that, yeah.
Let's look at that. Will you type that in, Sean, as an option under exceptions? Okay, let's go to Mark Jelinski, and then we'll go back to you, Darren, because I think you put your hand up for a different reason, but you were jumping on that one.
Okay, great, thank you. I want to address a couple specific issues first, and then the bigger picture issue. It had been mentioned that this was in the quote unquote prescriptive part of the code and therefore would be difficult. Now, I guess the issue is that, yes, it's prescriptive in that it's dictating one specific type of technology, more or less. But really, the thing that's changed in the 2021 IECC is that there's no longer the a prescriptive path. You know, that's if I'm not mistaken, right? I mean, we have the modeling path, and then there's the following the code as written. I understand that Denver will be modifying that introduction and how you use the modeling path, but that's just a detail on how the code works. I think that if I get the idea of that 1.35 watts per square foot of conditioned floor area, it being applied over the whole building, I would recommend that be specifically stated in that exception. So in other words, 1.5 square foot of conditioned floor area over the entire building, so that it's not misinterpreted or applied that you can only use it in 1.3 watts per square foot chunks at a time. Good. You've covered the new buildings. However, you intend, at least you'd like to be able to have that apply to some level of renovation. That is where it will get very interesting with Chapter 5 has already been mentioned. So I would recommend that you go into Chapter 5 and address how, which portions of, C403 do get applied. That's already kind of applied, and the IEBC, that's another code that refers to what happens when you modify an existing building. So just make sure that there's no unintended consequences there, and that both Chapter 5 of the IECC and the IEBC are aligned with that. And they do things. For instance, the IEBC spells out specific things of usually life safety that has to be upgraded when you do this level of renovation. So it's a great place to explain what needs to be done for different levels of renovation. Thank you for addressing the healthcare issue. However, it's broader than that. It's not just makeup air. The issue is, and it's not, first of all, what's healthcare? The code doesn't really recognize healthcare. The code talks about, a B occupancy with an ambulatory surgery center or ambulatory healthcare. So that's a specific type of code recognized occupancy. There's, I2 condition 2, which is hospitals, and maybe that in fact, that's a good point. So all of I occupancies generally need to provide heating when the utility power fails. And then there's other facilities that require heating when the utility power fails. What do you do to put that into the code? Good question, because many of those are just, you want to do it and you should do it. It's a good recognition of the affordable housing here, but there's plenty of people who want to pay for having heat when their heat goes out too. And there's other entities that are required by not the Denver Building Code, but by accrediting agencies, by national, say in laboratory example, you got to keep your hazardous material system going. So anyway, if you're going to do this, you're going to need to expand this to allow for other occupancies. Okay, so big picture, how to do the all electric.
We're gonna have to move on in just a minute. If you have just one more thing to add.
I do, and that is how to address all of this and how to encourage all electric. C406. I would highly, in my opinion, this is just the wrong way to go with a prescriptive requirement. I think that the C406 provisions are perfect for this. What Mike was saying, we designers need the flexibility to allow our innovations to come out. Use C406 to highly disincentivize using gas, but give me an option for these places where I gotta have some gas. That means that I'm going to pull out the stops to meet all the other requirements.
Thank you, Mark. And there is a whole working group on C406, and at the end of the day, this will be up to the code committee to decide, do they do just one or do they do both? So that's not really the discussion point of this group, but thank you so much for all your other ideas. Sean, is there anything that you want to respond to or note around some of the healthcare facilities? We had called out healthcare specifically, not all of those uses you called out, Mark, require backup power in case of emergency. Healthcare does, and they don't want to have, it helps them if they don't have to have as many generators for backup. Sean, you can explain better, but go ahead.
So I think with healthcare facilities, it's a term used throughout the code in multiple situations, but it is not a defined term. So it is a term of art. So it's one of those terms that we're kind of caught in between. It's used in the code, even though it's not defined already. So if there's ambiguity, we kind of already have a problem because it's already used so often. I think for the situations that Mark was talking about, that number one could certainly be rephrased so that it was any systems serving an occupancy required by any law to be back to have backup heating system. And then it doesn't have to be code. It can be, any law or regulation, and we can find the way to phrase that the right way. I think one question I have for the group, particularly Taylor, is that at the efficiency levels that we're talking about for Denver, is code compliant good enough for all electric building, an all electric heating system? Does it need to go beyond that? Does that already constrain the use of electric resistance enough that we don't need, that we're handled, or do we need to set a higher standard?
And while Taylor answers that, Sean, do you want to make that change to the healthcare facilities? Just some rough language in parentheses that it's going to change to be anything that's required to have backup.
Yeah, Sean, I think to answer your question, that's exactly right, is to use an all electric resistance system, there's no way you're going to meet code. So it's just really like in those instances of reheat or certain areas or whatever, because to meet code, especially what we're talking about with the new modeling pathway, it's going to have to be a really high performance system that probably has energy recovery and heat pumps and all those things already, right? So it's just like that reheat or others. But that's where your exception for that you added in there, I think, handles that perfectly.
But also really simplify it. There'd be a lot less exceptions this way.
Yeah. What does the group think of that? I do want to, we can comment on that. We can comment on the options Sean put for 2 and 3. And I want to raise that Elizabeth, I think we've covered most of the comments she made. She raised that something about aquatherms that maybe you can explain, Sean, that I think we might just want some input from the group on. So maybe can you raise just what is the question on aquatherms, and then let's get some final words. Feel free to put things in the chat also on some of these, because we're hoping to get enough input that this is feeling pretty good, and I want to kind of check that before the end of the hour with the group. So sort of with these changes, we're feeling pretty good directionally. Again, we have to review some of the details still, but go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, her concern was with aquatherms, systems that provide, and this is where my training as an architect instead of a mechanical engineer shows, but as I understand them, they are a system that uses the domestic water heating system. So the water heating system in a fan coil to provide space heating as well. And so that was one of the systems that she thought was particularly one that Denver should be looking at to try to prohibit. And so curious what the group thinks about those systems.
Yep. And Mike, did you have another new issue to raise? You still had your hand up, and then we'll go
No,
to
sorry.
I want to comment on all the existing issues. No, that's fine. Okay. So Darren, on aquatherms or points 2 and 3, or anything else that you feel like sort of need to still wrap up?
Yeah, the aquatherm question is a good point. I mean, I would think that the way this reads, it would be exempt. And it's super common for, to see aquatherms in kind of the multifamily environment. And I think that you might be unintentionally steering people towards that, because while you won't steer people towards large central boilers on small commercial projects, if the aquatherm is like the one cheap exemption left, you might be doing that. It's a good question.
How would we word what
well, I think again, it kind of comes back to by starting with as Mike said, picking winners and losers of explicitly targeting warm air furnaces versus targeting systems that get heating from natural gas. You know, it's the difference of that definition of what we're calling warm air furnace, I guess.
Thank you. Courtney?
Thanks. In Elizabeth's note, she provided a suggestion of prohibiting space heating via the domestic hot water system to prevent the aquatherms. I'm just wondering if the group thinks that that's appropriate, or are we missing anything if we do that? Is that the right solution?
I think the concern would be that you could do it with a heat pump, right? So we are starting to see projects, smaller projects, look at having a heat pump water heater provide heating to an aquatherm type system, which I think is a slam dunk for Denver's goals, right? And for performance. So maybe if you just added gas in there or something.
Yep. We could prohibit space heating from gas domestic hot water. Can I go back to the question? I feel like people are still wrestling a bit with the general formulation of this. So I just want to gut check on that. We did consider, say, requiring electrification for all systems under a certain capacity, because it really is the large ones that tend to be those boiler systems that are harder to electrify. It gets just really tricky to define the capacity as the capacity per the building, per the per the system. There's a lot of these little supplementary systems. Do those contribute to the capacity? Like, it was hard to draft, and it was hard to feel like that was going to be really clear, and it doesn't exactly align with Energize Denver. And so we know neither of those formulations are perfect if we want to exclude the large boiler-based systems for now from electrification requirements. Is this the better of those options? Is there another option? I kind of want to just gut check on that, because this could be reformulated in that way, but we chose this because it seemed, see if you have a better summary, Sean, but it seemed more like a graceful formulation than a heating capacity based formulation.
I think additionally, one of my questions about aquatherm type systems is, you know, if you have a central boiler system that's also providing hot water, you know, in a commercial building where it's just, they've already got the boiler for space heating, and they're just using, you know, a little bit of the capacity to provide a couple of bathrooms, you know, or of lavatory hot water. Does that prohibit it? Because, you know, the code doesn't define domestic hot water. It only defines service hot water, and that includes domestic hot water. So that would be my concern, is there a way that we can formulate it in a way that doesn't impact these commercial systems where, you know, siphoning a little hot water off your space heating system for service water heating, it actually makes sense.
Someone want to answer Sean's question, or Mike want to explain your comment? I've read your chat, but I don't know if you want to make Fulton explain it. Mike, I might ask you explicitly. I'm not sure. Others might, but I'm not sure I entirely understand what you put in the chat in terms of why this would prevent thermal storage.
Well, I guess my take on that would be the up to 1.35 watts per square foot of conditioned area. Because you're limiting what, I mean, I guess that's electric resistance space heating. So I guess I see what you're saying, but in a way you could say if you're doing thermal storage with electric resistance that's, you know, coming from a central system, like an electric boiler with storage, you know, that would be limited as well.
Do you have language you would propose adding so that that doesn't happen? Because I don't think that's the intent. I'm not sure that's how it reads, but. You can think about that.
Yeah, let me think about it.
Taylor, Darren, 2 or 3, which do you like better of the options Sean put in? I think you were the 2 weighing in most heavily on those exceptions.
Between 2 and 3?
Mm-hmm. Those are one or the other. Is that right, Sean?
Right now, I suppose it could be both. Because
Oh yeah, or would you like both? Yeah, or what other questions, Sean, do you have where you could use some input from the group? This is really helpful. We'll have to work on a few things, but I think we're getting close.
I think for me, the big question is, if we have 2, do we need 3? If we need 3, what is that capacity threshold? Even if that's I need to go check and see, or I need to go think about it and see.
Yeah, I think that kind of gets into Mike's point of, I mean, what is big, what is small? It's hard to put a number on it. I mean, I could tell you what size we typically see makeup air units in certain light commercial buildings, but that doesn't mean the systems don't exist with equipment options that could do that. I don't know.
Yeah.
3 seems hard to nail down to me.
Yeah, that'd be my comment too, is just like whatever you choose when someone's 100 CFM above that or whatever, they're going to be mad, right? So it's just that I like 2 better just because it's cleaner. But so.
Yeah, maybe, so take 3 out. Like, right, 3 is why we struggled with a different formulation of, that's why we settled on furnaces, right? Because it's just 3 is the alternate formulation of this whole proposal, except for all heat, right? Can I just do a gut check of like, how is this sitting with folks? Trying to think of kind of the best way to do that. Can we like have everybody actually turn on cameras, and are we getting close? I've sometimes used the like 5 is this is amazing with your hand. 1 is I absolutely hate this still. 3 is, if the code committee moved this forward, this is workable, but it's maybe not my dream. Can we do like everybody turn their cameras on? Maybe you stop sharing, Sean, so we can actually see people. Like, are we getting close with, we need to refine a few of these things, talk to a few of you offline. Can we just kind of do a check from the group on space heat? Are we getting close? We still don't have a bunch of cameras. You could drop things in the chat too, but for those that have or I can't see everyone. This is problematic in Teams. But go ahead, those that I can see. And then maybe I'll just tell you who
What's the legend again here?
The legend is 5 is I absolutely love this. 3 is it's sort of, it's okay if the code committee wants to move it forward. And 1 is I absolutely hate this. It really doesn't work. And so let's do, got it. Let's do hands for those that are on the screen to just kind of get a sense of, are we getting close? And I don't see, sorry, Teresa, do it again. Some of you don't have cameras, so just put them in the chat. And okay, I see some 3s and some 4s and a 1 from Mark. I cannot see, so you're gonna have to put it in the chat. Mike Reynolds, Mark Snyder, Darren. I'm sorry that like Teams just won't show me all of you. Matt Jones. Let's see who's the +4 that I can't see. It won't tell me who they are. Antonio, Chuck. I don't know if I saw you. You're muted. Marie. Okay. I think. Taylor, I can't see you right now.
I'm a 4.
Okay, thank you. Just Mark Snyder, Matt Jones, Mike Fulton. There's a few of you that just for some reason, even I'm sure your cameras are on, Teams just won't show me you.
I posted in the chat.
Yeah, I put it in the chat.
Okay, thank you all. I hadn't been tracking the chat as I just tried to see who I could see. Again, mostly 3s and 4s. I think except for Mark Delinsky, and that's noted. Did I miss anyone else who's sort of under a 3? Are there other things that, like, kind of topics we need to work on here? Well, there's a couple of little things, but and thank you, Chuck, for weighing in that, like, you prefer the incentives in C406. I think that's where Mark is too, maybe just a little more strongly. But this is starting to feel pretty workable if the code committee wanted to do something that just says, like, in alignment with energized Denver, new buildings have to not be putting in furnaces.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of incentives and driving towards, performance and low energy designs. And so I like some of the modeling discussions that are being discussed.
Yeah.
But I'm also concerned by driving, like, picking winners and losers. Like, we know that with heat pumps, we're increasing the amount of refrigerant that is being used and required to be used within buildings, especially with some of the, like, VRF systems. And so by picking winners and losers, we could be unintentionally creating consequences for, the environment.
Yeah, thank you for raising the refrigerant question. I think we noted it in the comments. That is actually another reason that we leaned towards the warm air furnaces, because the plug and play system for these is usually not going to have a lot of refrigerant lines, because furnaces are serving a forced air system versus like running refrigerant all over the building. And so there's a lot less refrigerant. It just gives us time. The refrigerants are getting better, but it's sort of, by picking this one system to ban, we are therefore the plug and play technologies are less of, there's less refrigerants.
Yeah, and Mark noted in the chat as well the definition of a furnace. I mean, you can find definitions that define it as something creating warm air using combustion, but IMC doesn't necessarily define it that way. And, you can look online and find multiple definitions. And so I think if we're going to use it as a defined term in our code, we should either update the defined term in the IMC or create and make it align it with the IECC. But it's something that should be tackled.
Okay.
That's another one. It's a term that's already used in the IECC for equipment regulation for efficiency. It's an efficiency class. So I think we have a few places where we have to look to see if a used term needs to be specifically defined.
Right, or if the lack of definition is no worse when we do this than it already was before this, perhaps. So we will follow up on a few of those sort of small things. It's great to know that directionally people are feeling like this probably is workable. Send us more stuff offline. As there are a few things that need to be worked through here. But thank you all so much for your time. We took a bunch of input on water heat last time. Also, we will come back to you next time to have a water heat focused discussion, and then we'll have one final meeting to sort of wrap up and review some of these bits. Okay.
Right.
Thank you all so much
All right.
for all your time on this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.